talk to us about some interesting
Okay,
news.
thank you, Council. Good evening, Council, and for the record, I'm Yiwen Wang, the Administrative Services Administrator for the city. And tonight, we're going to actually, for the third time, talk about our fiscal sustainability. And so this was initially introduced to Council during Council retreat earlier this year. And then in April, we provided follow-up information. So this is a series of third discussion. And so what we have reviewed previously in the last couple of meetings, we looked at our projected budget gaps in 2015-16 as well as near future, and also our limitations in terms of our capital resources, and what we have done in past budget cycles in terms of reductions. And also we review some revenue options that are available to the city. And just to briefly update on the past budget reductions. Over the last 6 years, the city, 7 years, the city reduced our operating budget by nearly $30 million. And throughout this time, the city continued to provide high quality of services with fewer staff and substantially more population. And at this time, we're looking at still some gap. So we have not really used any major or general tax and fee increases during the recession. And in 2015, we have a smaller gap, about $800,000. We believe we can find one-time resources to bridge that gap. But still in 2016, we are looking at about $3.3 million of gap at this time estimated. In addition to operating budget gap, we still see that we have a lot of capital needs, especially in our grant matching fund. We have been advancing or using future years resource to match our grant. And so we really need to create a sustainable resource to allow the city to match federal and state grants.
Okay, Ewan?
Yes.
Now, I just want to clarify for the listening audience. We currently have a balanced budget.
Correct.
There is no budget deficit. And what we're
yes.
looking at is, for 2015, we will have a balanced budget because we'll have to change some funds around that we can do to make it balanced. So what we're really talking about is that our spending is going up faster because of inflation and costs that we have no control over than what our income is. So we basically have this is where our choices are going to be coming in, is to either look at other added revenue, give ourselves a pay raise, or basically then we cut services or something, because we are required by state law to have a balanced budget. We cannot have a deficit. I mean, it's as simple as that. And I just want to be sure.
Thank you for the clarification, Council President.
That's general public.
That's accurate. We always present a balanced budget, and what we're discussing now is how to balance our projected budget one way or another.
Right. If I could just jump in, Council President, you're absolutely right. So as the council knows, we have discussed really for a number of years the challenges we face, and as Ewan showed in the earlier screen, to get to a balanced budget every year, we've had to reduce our expenditures in order to make sure that we were balanced. The city adopts by law a biennial budget, so the next biennial budget will be 2015-2016. We started in February with you in looking forward at what we would potentially have in 2015 and 16, and identified that, as you've mentioned, Council President, by 2016, we'd be looking at a deficit if we did nothing. And so we're here today to talk about options that would help us get to a balanced budget in 2015 and 2016.
So, based on that discussion, and based on what we're currently looking at for 2016, and also our past action to balance our budget in the last 6 years, the $3.3 million gap we're currently looking at, if we do not have new revenue resources, we think will have a visible impact to our service levels. And so again, what happened or why we're here and what get us to here? As council are very aware of, that over the last decade or almost 15 years now, there's a number of both voter initiated action as well as the state initiated action that limit our tax revenue. Starting from 1997, the referendum 47 limit property tax growth to inflation, and before that, all cities were allowed to raise property tax by 6% a year. That's the LIT, or growth limit. So this, referendum 47 is really the first time that the cities were not allowed to raise property tax by 6%. And then subsequent to that, there's the motor vehicle excise tax, and that really reduced the locals' capital funding for transportation improvement projects. And limitation again in 2001, further limitation to property tax growth to 1%. So rather than inflationary growth allowed under referendum 47, by 2001, cities can only grow our existing property tax by 1% per year. So that compounded by during the recession, the state budget made some changes, really shifting the shared revenue from city portion to balance the state's budget. And so far, the recovery, while it's steady, but it's being slow still. As of May, our sales tax collected year to May 2014 is still 3% below our sales tax in May of 2008. At the same time, over the last 6-7 years, our service demand continued to increase because of population growth. And also, there's certain sector or portion of our costs continue to grow much faster than inflation, such as medical, healthcare coverage, and pension costs. So all of those demand are really growing much faster than our revenue growth. And again, the other piece of it is that the city really only get a small portion or fraction of the tax paid by Renton taxpayer. And the next slide will show, in terms of our property tax, the city only get 23% of every dollar the property tax residents pay. And the 77% of the property tax goes to other government entities. And similarly, sales tax, the city get 10% of sales tax generated from the local community, local business. And so for each $100 purchase you made, you're paying $9.50 or so, depends on what kind of purchase, but generally it's $9.50 of sales tax. We get 85 cents back.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
even if you go back to that previous slide, the one, the dollar bill,
Yeah, here it is.
that is a wonderful graphic for people at home to see, rather than the typical circle with the colors on it, because when we talk this language, they can clearly see what the dollars look like, because that's what they see when they see their dollar. And I think that how did we get here? a big part of it is messaging and how well do we communicate with our communities, and I'm speaking of all of the cities, so that they understand the importance of this and how it impacts the services they're going to get in terms of revenue that we try to generate.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And we were just looking here at can you go to the pie chart again, the next slide?
Sales tax?
Yeah, but it's notable that, so we work really hard to get our sales tax base up. We do a lot as a city, have a full economic development department, and it is notable that transit gets twice as much as we do for every dollar we can raise in sales tax. So the city, which is providing all this infrastructure to make it all possible, still only gets less than the half of what the transit share is for that.
Right, as you point out, really, most of our local services is provided by city, yet the city get a small portion of the tax revenue. But at the same time, sales tax is the second largest taxing source the city has. So, and this is the only really taxing source the city can grow. Property tax, yes, the new construction will grow as well, but otherwise the growth is limited to 1%. And sales tax, it actually has higher potential of growth than just 1%. So it is still very important for us to grow our local economy.
Mr. Chair.
Ed?
So even you said grow, but we're still limited at the 10%.
Correct. Our share is only the 10%.
Okay, so we can grow the pie.
Yes,
But-
exactly.
We're still getting, for every $100, 85 cents back.
Crumbs from the pie.
Again, it's a very important resource, and I think local jurisdictions are competing with the sales tax because the limitation on property tax.
Yeah.
So, in this chart that we prepared, in comparison to with the city of Renton, with other King County, selected King County cities, on per capita tax revenues generated by each jurisdiction. This is a 2012 figure, and we modified this so it eliminate the fire service and library service, because some cities Seattle has both fire and library services, and a number of cities have fire service and some doesn't have fire service. So once we delete those services, this is how the tax revenue look like. And I do want to point out that both Kent and Kirkland has added new revenue sources in 2013. Kent implemented B&O tax, and Kirkland in 2012, they went to voter for a couple of road and parks levy. So those has not been, those numbers not reflected in this comparison. But again, Renton is comparing reasonably with our peer jurisdictions. And the other way to look at our tax burden is that between 2000 and 2013, if we look at, that's the city's tax revenue on per population base, so per capita tax revenue, when we adjust that by inflation, our today's tax per person is about 1/3 lower than the tax we collect in 2000. So over time, we have received less money to serve the population we have now.
We talked about this chart before. I think if the mayor were here, he'd point out that oftentimes our taxpayers don't feel like they're paying 1/3 less revenue, and in fact, in some cases, their tax bill has actually gone up. I think, as we were showing in the previous charts, the challenge for us is we receive a pretty small portion of the pie, and often there have been other adjustments to the taxes by other jurisdictions that have in fact impacted people's tax bill, but our per capita tax bill for folks has in fact gone down.
So, when we talked about that, we have a budget gap in 2015 or 16, we're projected budget gap. We are not alone. There are many other jurisdictions are looking at a long-term sustainability for their service as well, to maintain their service as well. These are some examples we know of. City of Bothell is working with the surrounding fire agencies to explore Regional Fire Authority there and for fire benefit charge. And City of Everett, they are proposing a business license fee increase and utility tax increase, as well as, I think you may have heard, they want to establish a transportation district so they can charge the $20 car tap fee for that purpose. City of Kent, as you know, they implemented B&O tax in 2013, and at this time they are considering a voter-approved property tax increase for new public safety facility. And Redmond has been discussing this for a while now. They are considering voter-approved property tax increase to maintain public safety service. And Seattle already placing or will be placing the Parks Maintenance Levy in August 2014's ballot, and they're also likely will have another ballot measure in 2015 for families and education's purpose. Then there are some other cities has recently implemented or asked voter approval for tax or fee increases. Kirkland, as I mentioned earlier, in 2012, they went to voter and received approval for both road as well as park maintenance levy. And so they start collecting that money in 2013. And Tukwila, during 2010 and 11, they added a parks district for their pole maintenance. They added head tax, and they also increased their utility tax they charge to their city utilities. Shoreline in 2010 also went to voter and received a voter approval for park maintenance levy. So we just want to show this so you know that many cities are, doing the same thing or have been facing the same challenges and looking for different ways of funding or sustaining their service levels. And during the spring, earlier this year, during council retreat as well as in April, we provided council with a list of revenue options. The reason we are more focusing on B&O tax is this is the only or one of the very few resources will provide sufficient resources really for the city to sustain or able to sustain our service level for the foreseeable future. And this is one of the tools that most cities, all the cities have, and 40 cities in Washington State uses that, including 12 in King County. The average tax rate for the 40 cities involved or used this is 0.15%, and by state law we cannot exceed 0.2% without the voters' approval. And Renton at this time is the only King County cities our size doesn't have a B&O tax.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Mr. Chair.
even if you could go back to the slide that says how Renton compares.
Yes.
It's the 11 cities there.
Uh-huh.
Can you let me know how many of these cities have B&O taxes?
So Seattle, Bellevue, Mercer Island, Issaquah, Kent all have B&O tax.
What about Federal Way?
Federal Way does not.
Okay. So Tukwila, Redmond,
is-
Auburn, Renton, and Kirkland and Federal Way do not.
Correct.
Thank you.
So we have started talking to some local business owner and members of the Renton Chamber of Commerce regarding potential of B&O tax, and we have heard some concerns. And one of the concern is impact on small business. And I want to say that the city is committed to minimize whatever impact possible on the small business. There's also question about competitiveness with other jurisdictions, and we want to make sure that whatever the tax structure we design will have the high deductible, so our reporting threshold, and also the tax structure will be compatible and competitive with other jurisdictions currently have B&O tax. Now, there are different ways of setting up B&O taxes. In some jurisdiction has varied tax structure, and for some cities, for some businesses, they have more than one activity, so they need to figure out different rate for different activities, so make the reporting more complicated, and the administrative burden is the other consideration. And so we will be trying in designing our B&O tax, if council approve, to make it as simple as possible. And we will be working with the state, as well as there's another multi-city tax reporting portal being developed right now. And we will see if we can participate in one of those portals, so taxpayer will have one-stop shopping or one place to report multiple tax returns. And so those are things we'll be considering, and if we do, if council approve the city to move forward. And so here is a hypothetical tax structure. Again, this is only for illustration purpose, and we have not made any decision at this time, but hypothetically, we can set a pretty high tax reporting threshold, so any business generate less than $500,000 in gross receipt on an annual basis will not be subject to B&O tax. And when we then get to the next level, between $500,000 and $1 million, for example, they will pay 0.025%. And so for maximum, if their annual gross receipt is $1 million, the maximum B&O tax will be $125. And so similarly, at $5 million, the maximum tax they will pay is $2,125. So it's just to illustrate what the tiered taxing structure can work, and how can we minimize the impact on small business.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
did we make any kind of analysis of looking at our business income demographics in putting this tax structure together? So in other words, how many businesses do we have in our city, hypothetically, that are under 500,000 in terms of gross receipts?
So, Councilman Taylor, we're just starting that process, as Ewan mentioned. This is just really for illustrative purposes. We have just begun to have discussions with the chamber and have several other meetings scheduled with them, but that would absolutely be one of the things we'll do as we continue to investigate is what the demographics are, how many businesses would be impacted by each of these tax rates, and we'll have that information. And our intent, obviously, is to come back to you often with information and feedback from the business community as well as from our own analysis, and as we begin to ultimately come up with a proposed recommendation for you to consider.
Right, that would be great. As a former chairman for the Renton Chamber of Commerce, that would be one of the things I would suspect they would be talking about right now. The other thing, too, that I think about in concert with this type of proposal is that could be linked along with it. I would surmise that the additional cost of services that the city has taken on has much to do with our growth, our population, increased number of people that are requiring those services, and that this could also be an opportunity for us to think a little differently as at the same time, in addition to the taxing mechanism that will create revenue, why not think about how can we create some and catalyze some economic development among small businesses that, we haven't even begun to, tap on yet. We do a pretty good job going after the big box, big companies. We get large employers that come into our city. But what about the small, businesses that could kind of pick up some of the slack, and we could put some focus and energy behind that? I think the chamber would be happy to hear about something like that also.
We certainly, we can schedule some time to sit down with you and give you an update. The administration has been actively working on that very thing, and have had a number of meetings with both investors and property owners, as well as businesses, including Chamber of Commerce members and others, to try to identify how do we better retain and how do we better encourage small business development. In fact, Eva and I had a meeting today with our economic development director to discuss some potential tools that we'll likely be back to you with in the next month or so, probably, with some ideas and thoughts about how we proceed. We'll certainly have a strategy for you to consider as part of the 2015-16 budget. But those are absolutely critical. Retention is a huge part of our economic development program, and we recognize that the fuel for the vitality of this city really rests with how well we can get small businesses to be created and to be maintained, as well as to obviously encourage and maintain our larger employers.
And I would be thrilled to be invited to any of those conversations to provide some of the things that I've learned that are happening throughout our county and other places as well.
So I think it's a good segue for the next slide, which is how we think the B&O tax can help. Of course, as we mentioned earlier, that it will allow the city to maintain current service levels for the near future, and as well as provide resource to leverage state and federal grants, and all of those grants are very important to our transportation improvement projects, which is important for all business locally, large and small. And also that we do want to make sure that we have some resource so we can do the necessary infrastructure improvements to help and facilitate economic development. So those are the use of B&O tax. And I think we mentioned to council before that there is still a potential that the regional fire authority can be formed, and we have different jurisdictions we have invited, and we have received some response to Fire District 25, for example, are interested to explore that with us. But if we do get that revenue source, and it will be required 60% voters approval in order to implement that. But if the resource is available, we think that the first and foremost, the resource will need to be used to enhance fire and EMS service. We need to have a stable and sustainable resource to continue to finance fire and EMS service, and we also really need to staff a Fire Station 15 because of growth in the North Smithton area and how busy Fire Station 12 RICs have been responding to the calls. So this will take some of those burden off. And we also hope that the fire benefit charge will allow the fire department to provide enough staffing to consistently staff our existing 8 units. And there will be some savings from the city side if the fire benefit charge is approved. And we think for the first thing, that is we need to build and equip Fire Station 15. And we also still have debt outstanding for Fire Station 13. So we'll continue to pay that off. And we have about $2.2 million a year obligation in the Left One Medical. So we'll be able to provide for that. And also then will allow us to maintain other city capital assets in a better condition. So that's where we think that the fire benefit charge and fire authority can help the city. And so at this time, we are really in the midst of giving city departments' directions in terms of how to prepare our 2015-16 budget and how we balance it. And we would like council, we recommend to council to direct staff to develop the B&O tax legislation to be effective January 1, 2016. So allow us to use that for 2016's budget. And we will use one-time resources to balance 2015's budget. And as we mentioned earlier, as Jay had mentioned earlier, that we will be working with stakeholders, the small business owners, the chamber members, and so forth, to design and work out the details about a B&O tax structure, and we'll bring it back to council during the summer months, so the next 2-3 months, until we finalize what the B&O tax will look like. And we also like the authority to continue to explore the regional fire authority, and really to provide sustainable funding source for fire and EMS service for the future. So those are the recommendations. We actually have a draft committee report as well developed and for council to consider. And is there any, if there's no other questions, this is the presentation I have.
Any questions from,
Mr. Chair, I don't have a question, I actually have a comment. Great presentation, and I'm really happy with all the initial outreach you all have done to the business community. You and I talked about this last Sunday, and by Farmers Market Tuesday, I already had folks come in and talking to me about the potential of this, and then again at Business Excellence on Thursday. So it's just great that you guys have already started doing the outreach and talking to folks, and maybe you'll craft something that not everyone will love, but that a good chunk of people will love. But great job.
I could,
Jerry?
I'm just, soon, as you come back to us, you'll give us a better idea of the time frame with some of these. For example, the Regional Fire Authority, if we were going to pursue that, and what kind of timing, because I know some of these are, needs long lead time before we get in the middle of them, but obviously we need to start looking at.
Right, and so the fire department is, working on that as well. So we'll be working with the department as a whole to see what's the timeline, and then make sure we have something that we'll bring back to council to consider.
I don't want to see things drag. I want to, make sure that we're keeping things moving so we can have an opportunity to make those decisions, so
Right. As
timely.
council knows, there's a prescribed process to develop a fire authority, actually defined by statute. We have to develop a planning committee, which some of you would participate in that, and so we'll be working actively. I think part of what our last visit with you in April, you asked us to continue to move forward. We have done that, and we're I think close to coming back to you with some recommendations on how we proceed to the next step in developing that, which would be which partners do we select of the potential partners. We obviously contract currently with District 25 and District 40. There are some other districts and agencies that we initially talked to. Even and I and Chief Peterson have a meeting this Friday, in fact, with one of those agencies to discuss this. So we think we'll be back to you later this month with a recommendation on how we would proceed to the next step. But we're anticipating moving forward as quickly as we can, whether we have something ready for the voters in 2015 or not. We recognize there are a lot of dynamics about that, and so we'll want to come back to you as soon as we can with a timeline so that we can get your approval on that, and then ultimately it will obviously depend on the voters of whether or not we move forward with the fire authority. This recommendation on the B&O tax is one really that was to try to help us determine how to move forward with the budgeting process. Without a clear recommendation on a revenue stream, we'll have to take a look at a budget that would, look at how we address that gap otherwise. So getting some direction from you on whether or not to consider this revenue source helps us in our budget preparation and what we'll be back.
And so what's the plan then for getting back to us with the B&O tax as far as recommendations. I know you have some work to do with the community and different things, but obviously there's a point at which it works or a point where it doesn't work for us. And so, I know you said this summer, but what?
Be a busy summer. You have to, we have to give you the budget October 1st. And so that, in our mind, that's the deadline for when we have to have not only the expense plan, but the revenue plan pretty well in place. And so we think that the details of B&O tax structure would have to be resolved pretty much by then.
Okay.
So we'll be working over the next number of months, but we see coming back to you clearly in August, if, and then again in September as we talk about how we're proceeding. That'll give us July to do our work.
Exactly.
Good luck.
We already told
you.
people to cancel their summer vacation.
Exactly. Thank you.
Okay, I do have a committee report, and I think it's become obvious to the council that we need to do something to be able to balance the budget for 2016. But also, and this committee report both states this, is we're very concerned about the impact on business. So the direction that this will be given staff is to take a look at what the business and the impact, and especially the impact on small businesses, because we don't want to discourage small businesses from starting, because as we all know, small businesses become big businesses, and we hope they start here small and stay. So with that, I'll read the report to you, and if it looks like it's okay with everybody, I'll sign it and we'll bring it out on the floor. The Committee of the Whole reviewed and considered the city's options to maintain quality public services and provide capital resources to preserve assets, leverage grants, and facilitate economic development, and hereby directs administration to develop necessary legislation to implement a business and occupation tax effective January 1, 2016. So there's a lot of lead time. The legislation shall minimize impact on small businesses and be as simple and convenient for taxpayers to comply as possible. The committee further authorizes administration to continue exploration and planning of a regional fire authority to improve current fire and emergency medical services for Renton and participating communities. And that, again, the fire authority is with a caveat that everybody knows that that has to go to a vote of the people. So it's not something that the city council can adopt. It has to go to a vote of the people, and it'll have to be well explained what the people are going to be voting on. And that, I just don't see that taking place before 2016 either. So if that's committee is okay, I'll sign it.
Do we not have, do we not have a written copy of that we can look at?
I just have one.
Just read it, but
Yeah,
We will provide council a copy.
okay.
Should be in your Dropbox, I think.
It's not.
I think it's,
Oh, it's not?
No, I've been, as he was reading, I've been looking here in both, in the places where I would expect it to be, but I'd like to be able to read it up close and personal if that's possible.
not a problem.
So I have one question. Could we have a clearer picture of what it would look like if we don't adopt this B&O tax? What kind of effects would it have? What is the,
Good question.
So, yeah, we're looking at,
look like?
for $3.3 million, it's about 33 positions. And so we have asked the department to look at what kind of service may be impacted. We don't have any specific we'll be recommending at this time, but all of those service impacts will have visible impact to service level. A lot of them are quality of life oriented, like code enforcement. There's a lot of potentials, but they will all have visible impact on what actually the city will see.
I think we mentioned the last time we were together, just a reminder, and even had it in one of our slides, since 2008, we've increased this population by 53% and decreased our workforce by over 13%. So there are not any, quote, easy cuts, close quote, that the city could do. I think anything that we would have to do to get us to address the $3.3 million budget gap is going to be felt as an impact on service. We won't be able to maintain services and absorb a $3.3 million budget adjustment. That there's just not anywhere where we have that kind of wiggle room anymore. So if the council wants us to, we can do that. It's one of the reasons we were trying to come to you early and get your opinion, because we could do an either-or budget. It's twice the work. You do a budget with assuming no tax increase and one assuming a tax increase. We can certainly put together some information, because obviously you'll be asked that by taxpayers, is why are we doing this and what would be the impact. So we can definitely come back with some scenarios, but we were trying to avoid actually developing a full-blown budget without. But that's certainly, obviously, we'll follow the direction of the council.
My question probably kind of ties in with that a little bit, that as we talked about this, I was a little concerned that we are, with this, authorizing the B&O tax, even though, I mean, that's what this states, even though we don't know what the costs or the impacts to the community are going to be yet. And so, you know, as it was, when I talked with you one before, I kept thinking in my mind, well, why don't we get those numbers first before we actually say that, yes, we're going to do that? And I wondered what your rationale behind approaching it the way you did.
I guess, can I take that question? Maybe I didn't state it very well, but this is just giving the staff to say that you will look at it and they need to come back and we do need to approve it. This is not absolutely approving a business and occupation B&O tax tonight, because we need to get more information. But in order for the staff to go ahead and start doing some of this planning, they have to have some idea that we would
Okay.
we would consider it.
Is that true? Because that's not the way it was presented. The way it was presented was that we were passing the B&O tax and they'll come back with what the levels will be.
Right, we're asking you to develop the tax legislation to take effect. We understand ultimately you've got to approve that legislation. This would allow us to move forward not only with developing it's complicated, a B&O tax, but developing the structure to come back to get your approval on, as well as at the same time developing the budget. If when we come back to you later this summer or early fall, the council just feels like this is not something you want to move forward with, then we'll adjust the budget accordingly. But this is, tonight is not authorization of a B&O tax. We don't have any legislation for you to consider. What we're looking for is direction from you a little bit more firmly than we asked in April. In April, you told us to proceed with both. We're actually asking that same direction tonight with a little bit more firmness in that we're going to begin to develop the budget, assuming that we'll be able to develop a tax legislation that you will ultimately agree with and approve, and that'll be part of the budget.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
So Jay, another way of saying this, and I appreciate Terry's questioning about that. Another way of saying this is that if we did not authorize you to create the bones to the legislative structure of this prior to our adopting a budget in October, and we did in fact decide after October that we wanted to implement a B&O tax, then we would have lost some timing in terms of having this ready for 2016 launch. Is that what you're saying?
Well, yes, I think probably more of the impact would be on us to try to develop a budget that would respond to no additional resources. That's, I think, what takes a little bit longer for us. But since the tax itself won't take effect until January 16, we would have time to develop a B&O tax even later in the year. But we would likely by then, we would have to have given you a budget October 1st that is a balanced budget, as Council President indicated. We can't give you an unbalanced budget. So without direction from the council, we'd need to move forward, assuming no tax adjustment and therefore reductions in service of up to $3.3 million in the next biennial budget. Okay. So that's what we're looking for, is if you feel like In order to maintain services, we need to adjust the revenue side of things, and we'll proceed with that assumption, recognizing we need to come back with specifics on a B&O tax structure that you and the business community feel comfortable with. Assuming, obviously, it's a tax increase, nobody's going to love it, but at least it recognizes that we're minimizing as best we can the impact on small businesses in particular, and trying to make it as fair and as simple as we possibly can, and delivering services that the community has indicated to you and to us that they want to continue to receive.
And, you know, just a comment here is, and I'm going to ask for indulgence from the mayor who's in the audience if we need to run over or continue this past 7 o'clock. But 85% of our dollars that we spend in the budget is employee cost. So when you start looking at cutting $3.3 million, you're talking about cutting a lot of people's jobs. And for those of us that did that several years ago, it was very traumatic on the employees and everything. And our employees, you got to admire them. They came through this. They have shown how they can do more with less. But when you start talking about doing a budget, and they prepare it not knowing there's no chance of a B&O tax or some other revenue structure, that means they've got to start doing budgets and people know where the cuts are. And what happens is that those people, good people, will leave for another city because of fear for their jobs and stuff, so you lose. So if there's no chance of us passing a B&O tax, then the administration needs to know today, because then they have to go to those dire straits. This just gives the administration the go-ahead that we're saying take a look at it, and we'll consider it if it's reasonable, and it's another decision point, but it's very, I've been there, so.
Oh, I just want to say, because again, as I read your meeting minutes, it says to me that we're starting it tonight, because it says, hereby directs the administration to develop necessary legislation to implement a business and occupations tax effective January 1st. So, and I have no qualms that we probably will end up with the B&O tax.
Well, I guess.
But to me, we're still in an investigation stage
Mr. Chair.
at a certain level, rather than let's start it today.
I think that they would have to take whatever legislation and bring it back to us for us to vote on anyway.
Right.
I don't think that this is just, we're giving them the tools to go back and bring something so they can create it to bring it back to us.
Can see that this could be saying, to me, the way it was presented was we were starting it tonight. We're going to, when it's still investigation, we're not passing any of the legislation that goes along with this. Right?
There certainly is an assumption on our part, if the council allows us to proceed, our assumption is that we can produce a B&O tax structure that you will ultimately say yes to. Correct. So in that sense, this is more than just, hey, we kind of like it, go ahead and maybe we'll say, we're asking for more direction from the council tonight than we did in April and than we did in February. This is a little bit more towards ultimately saying, yes, we're going to invoke this. We need to know that the council is okay with us proceeding with developing a budget with the assumption that there will be a revenue source that will balance the budget. And right now, the option we're suggesting is the B&O tax.
Okay. I don't like the wording exactly. That's okay.
Well, but I think the important thing is what the intent is, and it's been clearly,
Right.
the intent has clearly been stated this evening, and it's still,
Right.
it's on camera, and it's
Right.
recorded, and so there's no way that we can say that wasn't the
That wasn't, yes.
that wasn't the intent. And I understand where you're coming from, but At some point, you gotta start moving the ball forward, and then we
Yeah.
can stop it.
No, and absolutely. I mean, and that's what I thought we were doing. It just as it's been presented and the wording on some of these things, it just appeared to me that we were starting tonight, essentially passing the B&O, that we were going to do it positively.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Yeah, I appreciate the comments. I know where Terry's coming from. I think we all do. You know, we made it this far through a really tough recession, and we didn't have to do a B&O tax. And I think to many of us, we thought we were coming out of it, and we, might make it through. But I think really that 1% cap on property taxes caught up to us, and inflation's caught up to us, and so here we are. But I think when I listen to this, I tend to a little bit agree with Terry. My first thought was, I thought we were just exploring this. On the other hand, I think we maybe do need to put out a pretty strong signal that we're asking the administration to get serious, because only then will we actually get the public involved in the process. If we made it sound too exploratory or vague, the public probably won't pay much attention. I think if the public perceives that, hey, council's pretty serious about this, that's when we'll start really hearing from people pro and con. So we probably ought to just identify, yes, this is something we're talking about seriously, and speak up now or forever hold your peace. In fact, I guess I'd just like to get clarity on what the process would be. I'd hope the administration, I think they've expressed they're going to be working on the specific format. I'd love it if the businesses can keep their comments going to the administration rather than pass them all through the council. But at this point, I'm sure at some point we'll hear plenty. It sounds like Jay,
We're
that's
absolutely, happy to do that. As I mentioned, we've got meetings scheduled already with the Chamber Board. We've met with the Chamber Executive Director already. We have meetings with other key businesses, and we'll continue to provide more, and certainly are open to any comments members of the public or business community might have. We're looking for feedback, so happy to receive that. They can contact the mayor's office or Ewan in her office. So.
And I think
I'm getting a consensus that I'll sign this, and then we'll report it out at the full council tonight. And with that, the committee of the whole is adjourned. And I think there's a young scout. If you'd like the paperwork, you're more than welcome to have mine.